for we're thankful that you have granted it to us and given it to us in such detail. But we also admit and confess before you the weakness of our own minds. Uh, there is so much that we need to know that we haven't had access to for a variety of reasons. And now, as I'm aging, I'm losing track of things that I have known in the past. So, given the weakness of our minds, in your mercy, deal with us so that we may profit from your word today and grow by feeding on it. For Jesus' sake, we pray. Amen. Right. I can't remember. Did we deal with the peace offering last week?
No.
Okay, Leviticus 3 then. Let's turn there. This is an incredibly important sacrifice. Uh, the word translated sacrifice in verse 1 is a word zevach. I'm going to look it up here just to see how often it's used in the Old Testament. ZBJ, oy vey, ZBJ. The word occurs, the noun form occurs 162 times in the Old Testament. Uh, it's not always clear that the word that I've just searched for is referring to this sacrifice, but this sacrifice is probably one of the most commonly made sacrifices in the whole Old Testament period. One of the reasons for its frequency is uh, it includes a feast for the offerer, and so this would be given. You would have this at a wedding. You would have this at a birth of a child. You would have this at any kind of celebration that you had, and so the we call it the peace offering. We'll clarify that before very much longer, but uh, the idea behind it is a sacrifice in which you're sharing table fellowship with God. That's a strange kind of a notion for us because we don't think of sharing table fellowship with God in any sense in our daily lives, but Israel did. And so part of the sacrifice is burnt on the altar as a gift to God. Um, most of the sacrifice goes back to the worshiper, and under certain circumstances, it must be eaten very quickly. So we'll talk about that as we go. This is all in Leviticus chapter 3, and I'll point out to you that chapter 6 and 7 is it? Let me get to the text here. Leviticus. Uh, oh my goodness, here we go. In I even put a marker in my Bible at Leviticus 3. In Leviticus 7, it's actually in chapter 6. You start at verse 8 talking about the priests and sacrifices. The sacrifices are listed in chapters 1 to 6 in the order that we're familiar with: burnt offering, grain offering, peace offering, sin offering, and guilt offering. In that passage in the rest of chapter 6 and chapter 7, the sacrifices are dealt with in a slightly different order. The one that's out of place is the peace offering, which comes last in that segment. So the sacrifice is unique in that it's the only sacrifice that the worshiper got to eat anything from. So as we said, part of the sacrifice is offered on the altar. Part of the animal is offered on the altar. Part of the animal goes to the priest, always with the hide. Every animal sacrifice, the hide of the sacrifice goes to the priest. And then the rest of the animal goes to the worshiper and must be eaten under fairly strict standards. Depending on the purpose of the sacrifice, it must it must be eaten before the third day begins, or by the night of the first day. So the sacrifice is unique, and we'll talk about that as we go. Uh, it's also unique in that, unlike, for example, the burnt offering, there are no inexpensive peace offerings. You in the burnt offering, you can bring large cattle, you can bring the small cattle, you can bring a pair of birds, and as we will see later, you can even bring a fine flour offering. So very, very poor people can make the burnt offering, but poor people can't make the peace offering because it entails the notion that you are celebrating the goodness of God in your life. And if you're very, very poor, you don't have the resources to offer a peace offering. So there are no inexpensive peace offerings made. The very word peace offering is odd in this respect. The Hebrew word is shalamim, Shelamim, shalamim. That sounds like, and you would immediately probably associate this with shalom, and thus the connection with the translation peace offering, which is traditional. It goes, I don't know how far back it goes, but uh, it's probably better to think of the word shalamim, which is plural in Hebrew, zevach hashlamim, as completeness or some such thing. But in terms of the function of the sacrifice, we really ought to call it a fellowship offering. So the fellowship offering is what we've just been talking about. Part of the animal is burnt on the altar, so God partakes in the sacrifice. The priest gets part of the animal, so the priest takes part in the sacrifice, enjoys the sacrifice. And the rest of the animal goes back to the worshiper and must be eaten either overnight or by the third day. So, depending on the purpose for which the offering is made. So you're basically throwing a feast when you offer a peace offering or a fellowship offering. Um, in chapter 3, if his offering is a sacrifice of a peace offering, verse 1, if he offers an animal from the herd, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering and kill it at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Laying the hands on the head identify the offerer with the animal. So in effect, the offerer is being sacrificed in symbolic ways. And kill it at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall throw blood against the sides of the altar. We'll have to talk about a lot of this before we're done. And from the sacrifice of peace offering as a food offering to the Lord, notice that as a food offering to the Lord. So this is a feast that God's taking part in, along with the priest and the worshiper. He shall offer the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that's on the entrails. Now, I'm way out of my league on this. I've I've not dealt with cattle in any way in my entire life. I have never dissected a calf uh, or a goat or a ram. Um, so I'm entirely dependent on what the textbooks say, what the commentaries say. I'm told that the main uh, organs, internal organs in what we would call the chest area, are covered by a large, thick layer of hard fat. Uh, the source from which I got that I trust, so I assume it's right. Um, but you can go astray assuming things. So I'm I'm proposing this. It's the hard fat that covers protecting the internal organs, and then the fat that's on the organs itself. This this would not entail getting rid of all fat. It's not all fat that's prohibited to Israel. It's some fat. It's particular fat. Uh, a healthy animal will have some fat um, in even its muscle. So we call it marbling in the United States. So you see a nice piece of beef that's in the grocery store, and it will have white lines and streaks through it. That's fat, but you don't, that's not prohibited. It's the other fat that's prohibited. So the fat is to be sacrificed on the altar. Um, so verse 4, he shall take the two kidneys with the fat that's on them at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver that he shall remove from the kidneys. Then Aaron's sons shall burn it on top of the burnt offering, which is on the wood of on the fire. It's a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Let me stop because he's going to repeat this for, let's see, in verse 6, it will be an animal from the flock. And you'll notice we glossed over this. We didn't mention it before, but in verse 1 and in verse 6, you can offer either a male or a female. This is the unique sacrifice in that way as well, because other animal sacrifices have to be males, but here it can be a male or a female. Uh, let me see. In verse 12, you talk about a goat. So what can you do with this, or what sacrifices can you make a from the large cattle, sheep, or goats? Are all three acceptable sacrifices? So um, now, when it talks about the various elements of the body that are offered, let me go back to that verse. Um, um, let's start with verse 3. Why would fat be offered on the as part of the sacrifice? Any ideas? No ideas? Dr. John
Because
says no, no ideas.
that's where the strength is.
Say again?
That's where the strength of an animal is, in the fat, probably.
Not really in the fat. Um, in where was that? Joseph, Pharaoh, I think it is. Pharaoh inviting Jacob's family to come to Egypt says, I will give you the best of the land, and you shall eat the fat of the land. So the fat, I I don't understand this. I've had some fat in my life, and I really don't like it. but for an Israelite, the fat of the land would be the best of the land. Um, so the fat represent folks. Um, you see a really, really skinny man walking down the street. All that you see is flesh on bone, and the joints stand out pronouncedly. Yes. What do you assume about that man? Well, he might be fasting religiously, or
He might be malnourished.
malnourished, and what stage or what
Sick
status?
person, sick.
Pardon?
He's
Sickly.
not a healthy man.
Yeah, but what kind of status in life leads to such malnutrition?
Poverty.
Poverty, exactly. So a rich man is likely to be fat. I don't know whether you've read any Shakespearean plays or not, but in our American high schools, when I was growing up, you had to read in 12th grade Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar. And in it, Caesar says, "Let me have men around me who are fat. Yon Cassius hath a lean and hungry look." So he wants people who are contented. He wants people who have resources around him. So the upper class can be heavy set, but the lowest classes of our societies are not usually fat. In America, they are because of the terrible quality of food that they eat. But normally speaking, somebody who's emaciated is not healthy. So the fat represents the best of the animal, the honor, if you will, of the animal. So if I'm identifying myself with the animal that's being offered, and I offer the fat of the animal, what am I offering in symbol? I'm sacrificing my honor to the Lord in order to give him honor. Does that make sense? I'm giving him my best. I'm giving him the best animal I can give. Let's go back up to verse 1, where he says, "A male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord." So this is again what we talked about in Leviticus 1. This is your breeding stock. Um, if you do this very often, you're going to endanger your herd, or you're going to be trusting that God will take care of the herd. So back to verse, where were we? Verse, was it 9? Yes, I guess. I don't remember where we stopped. Oh, here it is, verse 3. "And from the sacrifice of the peace offering, as a food offering to the Lord, he shall offer fat covering the entrails." Entrails, we know what that is. Um, I've mislaid there it is, my mouse. The word entrails is in Hebrew, the nearness, or these are the inner organs of the human body, including the heart and the stomach, or at least this word entrail refers at other places to the heart, the stomach, and it also refers to the human psychic center. That is, um, uh, in Hebrew, in English, in American English, I say to my wife, "I love you with all my heart." In Hebrew, that would make no sense. In Hebrew, if I said, "I love you with all my heart," she would say, "Not sure what that means." Because in Hebrew, you love her with all your innards, with 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 your lower belly. Are you with me here? Yes, no? That's where the affections are. The heart is what you think with. So I love you with all my reasoning. If I said to it in Hebrew, if I said to my wife, "I love you with all my heart," I would say, I love you with all my thinking processes. And that wouldn't communicate to her very well at all, as you might expect. But the heart is the core of who you are. That's why in Proverbs, we can say about the fool that he has no heart. He's lacking heart. He has no sense. He has no core reality about himself. He is on every road all at once. He's chasing every pretty thing, every shiny thing in life. So the entrails are your affections, your emotions, your very life. So if in the entrails, as we mentioned just a minute ago, if in that we find, let's see, I have a note on that. Here it is. The word, the stomach, we said the heart, the stomach, the human psychic center, as well as the inner being, the seat of the emotions, everything we're sacrificing to God. All of this is laid on the altar before God. Does that make sense? Yeah. So going on, let's see, the two kidneys. That doesn't seem like something I would want to offer to God. But we're offering the kidneys because your kidneys are also where your thought processes are, according to Hebrew vocabulary. So your thought processes are in your kidneys. And let's see, two kidneys, the fat that's on them at the loins, the long lobe of the liver. Now, once again, I'm completely out of my depth here. I have never examined livers. And I have been offered liver to eat, and I tried it, and I will not eat liver again. As long as I live, I will never eat liver. So, but it doesn't taste good to me. But the liver is the heaviest organ in the body. And I hear, Brother Thompson, is your wife there? Oh, good. I can say this and get away with it. The liver is the heaviest organ.
Heavy, she says.
It is? Okay. It's the heaviest organ in the body. And as such, its name in Hebrew is keved, Kebed, kebed. But the root, Hebrew develops its vocabulary around consonants, and it changes the vowels to change the function or the meaning of a word. So kebed means liver, but the same consonants, KBD, can also be used for kavad, to boast in something, or kavod, honor or glory. So we're offering our honor to the Lord as we offer the animal's liver. But it's not the liver as such, it's the protuberance of the liver, or as my text reads, the long lobe of the liver. In Hebrew, it's the excess of the liver, yoteret, the thing that sticks out from the liver. Once again, I've never seen a liver except in the grocery store, and I don't pay any attention to it because it has no attraction to me. But there's apparently a protuberance on the liver. I have, however, dealt with some texts from the ancient Near East in which they were giving liver omens. In making a sacrifice, the priest would pull out the liver. They had actually models of livers, and there was always a little thing sticking up in the model, but they had marked it off with segments and so on, had named each of the segments of the liver. And so if there was some anomaly in one part of the liver, they would examine the records of liver omens in the history of the language and say, well, at this time there was a liver omen like this, and there was a king that lost his kingdom, and so they assumed that that was going to give them guidance about what the future was going to be. So that protuberance of the liver itself would be heavy, and it would be a sign of honor, but that protuberance would be the greatness of your honor, the most honorable thing that you are, that you can think of in yourself, that anybody would identify with you with. That's being sacrificed on the altar. So this is very important as we partake of these, as we look through this material. All of this will be burnt, verse 5, on top of the burnt offering. So it's a very real reality that the burnt offering is the foundation of all other sacrifice. No sacrifice is made during the day until the morning burnt offering is made. So the burnt offering is there on the altar, being burned to as far as they can get it to go. And any sacrifice that follows, the grain offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, are offered on top of the burnt offering. So the burnt offering is the basis for all sacrifice. This is the foundation. You want to understand sacrifice, you start with the burnt offering. So all of this is offered on the altar, but remembering that the animal is my substitute. I have identified myself with the animal as I make the sacrifice. And so the animal is symbolically dying in my place in that regard. If you look at verse, let's see, there, verse 2, the priest, he shall lay his hand on the head of the offering and kill it at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall throw its blood against the sides of the altar. The blood will be dashed. They had there were two ways of applying blood. You could this has pour, I think. No, it says throw. So dashing the blood would be throwing it against the side of the altar. So you'd have a bowl in which you would catch some of the blood, and you would dash it against the sides of the altar. The rabbis later suggested that they had two bowls of blood, and they would take one bowl and splash it against the corner so that it went on two walls of the altar, and then the other bowl to the opposite corner and splash it so the blood is on all four walls of the altar in the splashing. So the altar, why would you pour out blood like that at all? What would be the point? Why do you apply blood to anything in Scripture?
Like cleansing?
For
Yeah.
removal of sin?
Yeah, well, it's more not so much sin as it is cleansing. We are accustomed to thinking in two categories: righteous behavior and sinful behavior. Hebrew, the Old Testament has many more categories, and clean and unclean are not related to sin and righteousness in any direct way. We sin, we feel unclean spiritually, we seek the cleansing of God, I think wrongly, and we'll talk about that later. But the Israelite, having sinned, didn't think he needed to be cleansed. He thought he needed forgiveness, but he didn't think cleansing was the problem. Cleansing comes when you have engaged in some activity that cannot be brought into the presence of God. Uh, for example, um, think about the days of Moses and Israel. 600,000 fighting men have to die in 39 years. Yes? Every fighting man who refused to go into Canaan has to die in 39 years. I don't have the time to stop and think about how many men would have to die every day, but some of you who are interested could go work it out. But the point is, they have to die. So you're the son or the daughter of one of such people. All right? Yes? I'm posing an illustration here. So you're the son or daughter of such a man, and he dies in your tent. Well, that's made your tent unclean. The tent is not sinful, but it's unclean. Yes? And you must prepare the body of your deceased relative for burial. And typically they buried within the same day that the person died. So you have to prepare the body for burial and bury the body, but that means you've touched a dead body. That means you are unclean. But you are doing something that would be considered faithfulness in a son or a daughter in preparing the corpse of your father, uncle, grandfather for burial. But you're unclean because you've touched a dead body and you're not permitted to go into the presence of God. But it was a righteous act to care for the dead body of your family member. Does it make sense? So you can be righteous and unclean. You can be sinful and clean. They are not interchangeable terms. So nothing to do with death, with human death, can be brought into the presence of God. It has to be only living things can be brought before God, and only living things can be sacrificed on the altar. But that's in the service of God. The death of a man in battle or the death of a family member in the camp defiles you. And you have a certain ritual you must go through that will bring cleansing. It's a fairly substantial ritual. It's not something quick and easy, but it's neither is it terribly difficult. But death is a major defilement, and so the issue is not that you've been sinful. You don't even make this sacrifice, the peace offering, because you've been sinful. You make it because you're rejoicing in the Lord. Does that make sense to you? Yes, no?
Maybe.
Yeah, the peace offering you only make because you're rejoicing. This is for rejoicing times. It's always for rejoicing times. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So,
Excuse me, some
yes,
sir.
sir.
I need some more clarity on that. You can be righteous, at the same time be unclean, and sinful but clean. So,
Yes,
is it a ceremonial cleansing what we're talking about here?
yes, precisely.
Okay.
Um,
So how am I supposed to worship God when I'm sinful but ceremonially clean?
well, you can't in the way that we're talking about. You can't go into the temple or the tabernacle in an unclean condition. You might be a righteous person, but you can't go into the temple or tabernacle enclosure when you're unclean. So you can't in that regard. So you must be cleansed before you can come in.
Thank you.
Folks, we haven't even talked about this, but and that would be primarily in Exodus. So this is one of the reasons we haven't talked about it. Do you know why the Levites camped around the tabernacle? it's always nice to live close to where you work.
Okay.
That sense. But there's a more basic reason. They are the guards of the tabernacle. So they are the barrier between God and sinful Israel. So if anyone unclean approaches the presence of the Lord, comes to go into the tabernacle enclosure, I must add that. The Levites must keep him out. And if he persists, they might have to even kill him. And if he's trying to get into the tabernacle enclosure by climbing the fence, I can't imagine doing that because the way the fence was constructed, you wouldn't be able to do that, but you could climb one of the fence poles and go in that way. They'd kill you for doing that. There's only one way to approach the presence of the Lord in the tabernacle. You must go past the camp of Moses and Aaron, and that's physically properly the way to say it. But by way of interpretation, the only way you can approach God is through the right covenant mediator and through the right high priest. If you don't approach by the right covenant mediator and the right high priest, you can't get into the presence of God. So if you're trying to crawl under the fence or climb the fence, come some other way, you will be put to death, because going into the presence of God, not by the right covenant mediator and by the right covenant high priest, is deathly. There's only one approach to God. And so anyone who goes a different way or tries to come in a disqualified way would not be permitted into the presence of the Lord. Now you could have a lot of sin in your life, but be clean and still come into the presence of the Lord. You could be righteous, a very obedient, very trusting, a person with deep faith in God, and unclean, and you would not be permitted into the presence of the Lord. So righteousness is not the primary issue here. It's clean and unclean. And clean and unclean are not, initially, they are not moral categories. They become moral categories. So if I violate those rules, then it's a disobedience to the law. But the mere being unclean is not a sinful thing. Is giving birth to a baby a sinful thing?
No.
No.
Not at all.
But Leviticus is going to say that a woman after giving birth is unclean. We'll have to talk about that. I try to sort out what that means. The idea is that all sexual activity must be separated from the presence of God. In Canaanite worship, you will remember the story of oh dear. Oh dear. I can't find the name in my mind.
Balaam.
Yeah. Judah. The story of Judah and Tamar. Yes? Yeah. When he turned aside to her, what was in view there? What was involved?
Adultery.
Yeah, idolatry, but from our point of view, it was a sexual ritual to try to get the blessing of the gods on your fields. So he had sex with her. Remember this? Yes. And when
Sir, could you repeat? Could you repeat? Could you repeat?
say again?
Could you say it again, sir?
Okay. When Judah went to Tamar, on the way to the sheep shearing, he was engaged in idolatry. That's certainly the case, but it was sexual activity. It was a sexual ritual to try to influence the god of the rainstorm, Baal, to give good rain for his crops. And what's interesting is when Tamar is discovered, as you remember, she sends
But
the
is
token.
it not out of lust that he goes?
Probably, but what I'm saying is the event is a sexual activity. This is not permitted in the presence of the Lord. So every expression of sexual behavior must be separated from the worship of God. When you've had sex with your wife, you can't go into the tabernacle enclosure for the next day. You must you must bathe and wash your clothes, and then you can go in. But you're unclean until you've gone through the ritual. Is it sin to have sexual relations with your wife?
When God has commanded that be fruitful and multiply, where your sexual intercourse becomes a part of God's plan in your life, then how can that very plan become a sin in the sight of God?
Because the Canaanites, folks, you live in a land where there's lots and lots of idolatry. Yes?
Okay.
Are there behaviors that idolatrous people have that you as a Christian would not engage in, although the behavior itself is not itself sinful? I think I know, I remember the dot in the forehead. Yes.
Yeah.
That was a common thing for Hindu women to have. Yes.
Yeah.
But I have seen Christian women doing that. It's for them, it's just makeup. It's just a way of adorning the face. But it's an act that in itself is morally not an issue.
Correct.
But because it expresses values of an idolatrous society, then it's problematic when a Christian does it. And so sexual activity must be kept, because every time you went to the temple as a Canaanite, you were having sex with a priestess.
Okay.
Or with a priest.
Okay.
So they got to keep that separate in Israel's mind, because it will confuse them completely. And you can see that better probably in your culture than I can see it in mine, because we don't have we're so secular now. But that's the point. So all sexual activity must be kept distant from the Lord. So the splashing of the blood against the altar is the evidence that the presence of God is clean. Now, if you wanted to sprinkle me with blood, very first thing I'd want to do is get my clothes off and get them soaking in cold water, and then get in a shower and wash it off. Amen? Would you agree with that? I don't want blood sprinkled on me. But for Israel, it was a sign of cleansing. Once again, this is a deeply cultural issue. What is clean? Think about your home. A clean home with air conditioning is different from a clean home without air conditioning. Yes, but a very conscientious homemaker without air conditioning will work to keep the house clean. Yes? But it's not clean like it is when you have air conditioning. Because when you have air conditioning, you close the windows, and the dust doesn't blow in the same quantity that it does in an unair conditioned home. Clean is a cultural issue, and God is defining clean things in terms of the culture in which Israel is living. So, sexual activity under the blessing of God still must be kept away from the tabernacle because it would too easily lead Israel to think, well, God is a fertility God, like Baal, like Asherah, like Ishtar, like now I can't remember the other goddesses' names, but they're all sexual. They're divine prostitutes, effectively. So the dashing of the blood against the altar signals that the presence of God has been cleansed, even though this human being has come into his presence. his presence has been cleansed, and his sacrifice is accepted. I don't know that we made this point in Leviticus 1 on the burnt offering, but I think we did, but I may not have made it in the way I'm going to make it now. I said to you that the Hebrew word for the burnt offering is a word that means arising. So smoke going up. Okay, yes. So the idea is that the smoke goes up to God and he smells the pleasing aroma, and he is soothed, he's made favorable toward the offerer, and so the sacrifice is pleasing then in the presence of God. Same thing's happening here. The Lord's presence has been invaded by an Israelite, but the Israelite comes as a genuine worshiper because he's bringing the sacrifice and he's making it according to the statutes. The pieces are burned on the altar. Folks, when I talked about the kidneys a while ago, I said, this is what you think with. That was a strange concept to you, I'm sure, as it is to me. It's strange to me too. But if you look elsewhere in the Old Testament, the same word for kidneys is used for the way a man thinks and reasons. They created new vocabulary by repurposing old words in new senses. In English, we borrow words from every place. So one of our words that comes from Hindi is pajama. We have lots of words from Spanish because, especially here in the southern United States, we're near Mexico. We have lots and lots of words that are from Latin and Greek. About 3,000 of the 5,000 most common French words are identical in spelling and in meaning to English. So we've borrowed words from everywhere in order to be able to name new concepts or name aspects of concepts that we want to name. Hebrew simply repurposed old words in new ways. So if you were to look, especially in Psalms and Proverbs, you would find kidneys. You won't find the word kidneys there, but you would find that the word kidneys shows up there for the thought processes and the thought organ of the body. The heart is the core of your personality. Your liver is your honor. Am I making sense? This is the way that God inspired the Hebrew Bible to be written. So this is the peace offering, and you look at verse 16 of chapter 3, and I read, the priest shall burn them on the altar as a food offering with a pleasing aroma. All fat is the Lord's. So the Israelite is prohibited from eating certain kinds of fat. Now, we've come through the worship offerings. There are three things that I want to talk about and we'll have to wait until we have about, about 9 or 10 minutes left, I think, in our session because we got started late. But we'll have to go on in the other two sacrifices next week and then go to chapter 7. But there are some basic things that you want to understand. First, what we've been doing is saying, if you were an Israelite making one of these sacrifices, this is what would be going through your mind, and this is the benefit that would come to you from having made this sacrifice. The burnt offering is an acknowledgement that God owns me. He owns my life. My life is his. Because I put my hands on the head of the animal, it's accepted for him to make atonement for him. So he is himself being offered on the altar. The grain offering is an acknowledgement that God owns everything I have. I have no wealth but what God has given. And if that's the case, then the grain offering is an acknowledgement that God owns everything that I have. The peace offering or fellowship offering is a sacrifice in which I'm rejoicing at something that the Lord has done. Let's go to chapter 7. Turn to Leviticus 7. I want to get the rest of the peace offering material in before we leave today. So in Leviticus 7 and verse 29, speak to the people of Israel, saying, whoever offers the sacrifice of his peace offerings, and I urge you to think of fellowship offering, because when you have fellowship, you often share food with one another. Yes? Well, that's what we do too. So fellowship is a shared meal. Who do you share meals with? Do you share meals with your family?
Yes.
Yes. You share meals with your friends?
Yes.
You share meals with your enemies?
No.
No. So this is a fellowship offering for people that you're in relationship with. His peace offering to the Lord shall bring his offering to the Lord from a sacrifice of his peace offerings. His own hands shall bring the Lord's food offerings. He shall bring the fat of the breast, that the breast may be waved as a wave offering before the Lord. And wave offering is a traditional translation. I'm still not clear on what the word means. So I'll have to pass it by. The priest shall burn the fat on the altar, but the breast shall be for Aaron and his sons. What does that mean? What does it mean to give the breast to Aaron and his sons in the sacrifice?
Again, probably it's giving the best to the representatives of God.
But you're also sharing a meal with them.
Okay.
So the holy priest is eating the food from your hand. You know, what would that mean to you? If you really respected the priest of your day, and you saw him taking the food that you offered and saw him eating that sacrifice, what would that say to you?
As I mentioned, probably sharing of a meal.
Yeah, it's astonishing that such a person, such an august person who is privileged to enter the presence of God would eat the food that I have brought. He goes on. Whoever among, verse 33, whoever among the sons of Aaron offers the blood of the peace offerings and the fat shall have the right thigh for a portion, for the breast is waved, and the thigh that is contributed I have taken from the people of Israel out of the sacrifices of their offerings and have given them to Aaron the priest and to his sons as a perpetual due from the people of Israel. So what I want to suggest to you is, first thing that we need to think about with these sacrifices is not what does it mean to me? what did it mean to an ancient Israelite? So if I make the burnt offering, and the priest accepts the sacrifice, the animal, and you've properly prepared it for sacrifice, and it is burned on the altar, and you see the smoke going up to God. That's a symbol that God has accepted it. In fact, he calls it a sacrifice of a pleasing aroma. And so the smell of the sacrifice would be communicating to you. It's amazing how odors stick with us. First trip to India that I took, we went through Sri Lanka, and we of course stayed for a night, or I don't think it was 2 nights, but it might have been 2 nights in Colombo. And there was some odor in the city of Colombo that it made me sick finally, until I got on the airplane and the air conditioning came on and started filtering the air. Well, many years later, I was working at a college here in Memphis that met in a church facility, and they had a printing shop in that church. And I would periodically walk past the printing shop, and every time I did, I smelled that same aroma. Yes? Are you with me here? When you were a child and you were out playing, and you came in and your hands and feet were so dirty and you had dirt all over you, and your mother said, "Go wash your hands." Yes? Did she ever say that to you?
Every time.
Yes? No? Every time. Uh, uh, and she'd say, "Now let me see them." And you'd hold them out. "Oh, you didn't do a good job of that. Go back and wash your hands again." Then you'd come back and she'd say, and maybe you took a shower as well, and she'd say, "Now, don't you feel clean?" That was propaganda. She was teaching you the way you feel when you've had a shower is clean. Okay. You're not, in fact, perfectly clean, but you're cleaner than you were. And she is teaching you this propaganda that this is clean. Well, God is telling them, you smell this smoke going up? God is pleased with that. Does that make sense? In the grain offering, same thing, God is pleased with it. In the peace offering or fellowship offering, the pieces of the animal that are parceled out among the priests, and the rest of it's given back to you. Parts are burned on the altar. God is pleased with this sacrifice, and he's teaching them what does it look like to serve a king who is God. And so first thing that we have to talk about is, what did it mean to an ancient Israelite? Second thing is, what would it mean? Because a good part of this is done at Passover. What would it mean at Passover for an Israelite to do this? At Passover, you might well bring a burnt offering as well as your ram for the sacrifice. And you will surely have brought grain offering, and that would have to associate itself with the other sacrifices. So all of this is going on, and you're being taught what Passover means. So at Passover, what would all this mean? The Passover sacrifice is a subset of the fellowship offering that we're looking at here in chapter 3. Third, what would this sacrifice mean when we think about what Jesus did on the cross? I've said this before, I'll say it again. God in 15th century BC taught Israel about sacrifice. And then 16 centuries later, he put Jesus on the cross and called it a sacrifice. We're reading the manual to explain what Jesus has done. And then fourth, what would this mean for us first as we take the Lord's Supper, but second, what would it mean for us just in our own spiritual lives? For Jesus' work is a sacrifice. it's a burnt offering, it's a grain offering, it's a fellowship offering, it's a purification offering, and it is a restitution offering. So the 5 sacrifices are fulfilled in the work of Christ. So this is where we're headed with this material in chapters 1 to 7. So we'll stop at this point because I think it's right at the hour. But this is where we're going to go. We'll go on with the other 2 sacrifices next week, and then start talking about these other categories as we think about them. So let me close with prayer. Father, thank you for the privilege of studying again, the privilege of dipping into a book that most Christians don't spend much time with. But you've taught us about sacrifice here. How can we understand Jesus without what this passage says? So we ask you to allow us to see with eyes of faith what needs to be learned so that we can see what Jesus has accomplished for us. In his name, therefore, we pray. Amen.